You ever come across a game just so utterly ridiculous that you have to look at it? No one outright said it was particularly good or anything, but even without any specific recommendation, you look at the unnecessary Z in the title, the insane cast of playable characters, or the who the hell wrote this level of story, and you think, good or bad, this is gonna be a thing. Welcome to that thing. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at HeroWarz. Yes, HeroWarz with a Z. HeroWarz is a top-down brawler, like Diablo but without the inventory management, with a heavy emphasis on its combat. Think of a combination of what I called a hack and slash with what Diablo and old-school PC gamers would call a hack and slash. Did I issue an official oops on that intro and conclusion on ELOA yet? My bad. As long as we admit that Yahtzee only ever used the term spectacle fighter to describe God of War clones, despite Devil May Cry predating that game by a few years. Alright, I'm digressing, but this game is certainly a spectacle. HeroWarz is developed by A-Storm, an offshoot of Dungeon Fighter Online devs Neopol, and published by COG Games, developers of Elsword and Grand Chase, who took over US publisher Killer Combo to gain self-publishing rights to their games. That's why I didn't say published by Killer Combo. COG is known for its flashy combo-focused action and weeb-tacular presentation, and HeroWarz is no exception, featuring a living manga presentation and possibly stolen assets to create one of the strangest mishmashes of story, gameplay, and presentation I've come across in a long time. Embrace the madness. The game goes for a mix in its art style, with 3D model work for the gameplay, while offering up hand-drawn artwork to use within the game's many cutscenes. Don't get too excited for that hand-drawn art, as while it looks fine, it's used in the simplest manner possible, by having character artwork grow and shrink depending on the tone of the conversation, with no animation work used. Basically, just take any piece of character art and zoom in for the aggressive yelling, and zoom out if they shy away, and you've just recreated the mission cutscenes entirely. There's far more effort put into the chapter cutscenes that'll play when completing a full mission chapter or starting a new one. But again, there isn't that much to them. This game also uses that oddly common animation technique popular in League of Legends and Guild Wars 2, where well-drawn, intentionally static artwork is then animated by stretching and warping the image to achieve the effect, rather than drawing individual frames. It tends to look really awkward at times. I cannot imagine how some artists would feel about considering lighting and perspective in their static pieces, only to have someone force the head to awkwardly bob up and down, highlighting now what looks like an unintentional Jay Leno chin. Most amusingly, if characters need to pick something up in these cutscenes, the object will simply be pasted over their hand, and oftentimes you'll see fingers still sticking straight out, not gripping the object. Essentially, there was some modicum of effort put into the game's look, but a lot of it just seems to be rushed out. This extends to the game's in-game model work, though we do need to give the developers props for creating a multitude of characters to ensure that each chapter at least sees the enemy variety change up. There's a bit of amusing effort put into the enemies, like ink pens that'll draw out their attacks before they use it, or wolves in poor-fitting sheep's clothing. Though the model work as a whole is a mixed bag. Some of it looks really nice, while others, especially when compared to the hand-drawn artwork made to represent them, will look incredibly disproportionate and chibi, as if the modelers for that particular character just couldn't create that character and took shortcuts. Given how the game is presented, the disparate pieces that by other games would look cobbled together will actually work here, and there's some interesting detail touches, like the fairy tale book chapter essentially taking place on top of massive books and pages. While the levels themselves are incredibly simple, this allows the developers to create a lot of variety in the look and palettes used to create them. It ensures the grind will feel a lot less tedious, even if it's likely to set in eventually. This is going to be one of those quick but still odd sections to talk about, as there is music, quite obviously, but it tends to be just so generic and blending into the background that it won't stick into your mind at all. It's not to say that it's bad, as bad music choices would stand out, and there's an odd anime-inspired cutscene with music that really stands out as being odd. The other downside to the music is that oftentimes you can't hear it at all, and we wouldn't be surprised if the music stops playing throughout the stages. See, the game's sound effects are incredibly varied and very loud, making it difficult to focus on anything but them when it comes to the audio. and for some characters it's a requirement to know when said abilities are about to trigger. In this regard, the game does really well as hits and damage have very weighty impact to them, which adds to the overall positive feel of the combat. Being a foreign-made game though, there is a bit of the odd usage of stock sounds, and the voice acting is in Korean instead of English. All in all, HeroWarz does well with what it needs to, and that solid sound foundation carries over into the gameplay itself, so let's just move on to that. Downloading this game is an adventure. It wants to launch from your browser, which will then open up a standard launcher on your desktop, and then ask you to install several add-ons and launcher files, tossing up random errors before you finally get a chance to access the game itself. I can't even begin to describe the process of installing this again, but prepare yourself for a headache that might not set in before you have a chance to decide you want to stick with this game or not. When you start out, you'll set your name, before you're able to choose which character to play. This is where you'll meet your first obstacle, as many of the most innocuous names will be met with an error message that reads, "Your nickname has violated the creation rules." The funny part is that the game will not tell you what those creation rules are, and there are no naming conventions and constraints posted anywhere. Dreskar couldn't get the name Dreskar and had to settle for Sech Dreskar. As for myself, Chaos D1. Nope. Chaos. Nope. Chaos the D1. No. Maybe it's the word chaos. Fine. MMO Grinder. Really? You wanna play? Fine. We're gonna play. You gotta be muffin kidding me. So, yeah, I'm fully expecting my account to get banned at some point, and I want you to know, COG Games, that it would be entirely your goddamned fault. Once logging in, you'll be presented with a cast of characters to select from, which will act as a class. You don't need to put too much thought into it, as the game actively encourages you to try out multiple characters, which will add to your overall account level, and all gold and key items will be shared across all your characters. After your selection, you'll be taken to the tutorial where you'll unlock the first few levels and learn the basics of your chosen character. This tutorial is actually far more representative of the game than you might expect it, as while it's short, it's the usual duration for story missions in this game. It even follows the usual formula of kill room after kill room before you meet a final boss and move on to the next story mission. There isn't really that much that changes from this formula, which adds a sense of tedium, but when the only thing that does seem to change is a mid-boss thrown in here and there. Some bosses will have some more interesting mechanics thrown in place and more enemies to fight. When enemies become massive swarms and damage sponges, the gameplay experience can get bogged down and turn the entire experience into a drag. Thankfully, the combat system is solid, and players of Marvel Heroes will feel right at home with this. Your character can attack in any direction you point your mouse at any time, while movement is achieved with WASD and skills are used through various button presses. This does lead to a bit of what were they thinking, though, as your ultimate skill is used by pressing the left and right mouse button at the same time, which oftentimes leaves the left attack or right attack instead and feel unresponsive. The other oddity is that they don't let you rebind your keys, so the attacks will always be stuck with the same binding. Keys used for skills are all over the place. Some use number keys, others will use letters, and some will use your mouse and scroll wheel. These additional skills will unlock as you reach level set milestones, with some of them being swappable replacements for skills that you already have, and others being passives. Gaining levels isn't too much of a challenge at first. You'll get about 1 level per story mission as you complete them, and with each story mission being very brief, you can easily start racking up experience. The shame of it is, though, is that the game is incredibly tedious, where later missions will feel like you're just being spammed with enemies to drag out the difficulty and lengthen your time played. The game is incredibly easy as well, save for a few exceptions, like one memorable boss fight that had incredibly unforgiving mechanics. It came out of left field too, as no other boss had anywhere near the intricate mechanics that this one did throughout the rest of the time played, not even the final story boss. Progressing through the story does help in other ways, like unlocking titles when you complete a chapter that'll grant you status boosts when worn, or even equipment slots. It's rather amusing that your character is unable to figure out how to put on shoes until getting a decent chunk of the storyline done, but none of this is reflected in your character model, as only specified costume pieces will change the outward appearance and not your gear. These costume pieces also come with stat boosts, which barely scratches the surface of the issues we'll address. The story itself, well, this certainly isn't the worst story I've seen in a game, but this won't be winning any awards. And it becomes such a nonsensical mishmash of ideas that it seems more like an afterthought framework to force in references. Part of the joy of this title is the ability to just laugh at the story, and many of the lines will just make you take pause before bursting out cackling. We actually knew this was going to be something special before we even started, as there is a book, an actual 139-page book on the HeroWarz website that'll detail the game's story and reads like preteen fanfiction. Elements of the story include, but aren't limited to, a girl named Nipples because she didn't wear a bra to school one day and still likes a nickname. While the game will have you encountering things like Pinocchio having multiple sclerosis and talking in one-word sentences. Yet Little Red Riding Hood somehow having it worse because her jaw is messed up. So naturally that's why she wears a hood, which covers everything except the jaw and in fact would draw more focus to it. Once reaching level 21, you'll gain access to your first sidekick, which are secondary characters in the story that can be summoned to do an attack, set up a shield, or start regenerating health pools. The latter ability is what your first sidekick will offer to you, but honestly it's easy to forget you have sidekicks altogether. They're only brought back to the forefront when in a dire situation, or you're stuck in a zone that actually demands you use them. This brings us to the unfortunately named Third World, which is an offshoot of the storyline and tasks you with completing challenging missions, oftentimes solo, though there is group Third World content later on. These challenges are unlocked at various level milestones and come with a warning that if you need a certain sidekick type, you should have a certain gear depth, representing how good your equipment is before entering. You also won't be able to use your healing potions here as well, so reliance on sidekicks and movement is mandatory to ensure that you don't get killed and can overcome the challenge. Completing all the story missions rewards you with everyone's favorite thing, randomly generated dungeons for level grinding. I'd spoil why this exists, but I'm not entirely sure I get it. If anything, it seems to illustrate the game still has a lot of content to release, as our version is still missing a good portion of the characters that would still seem really interesting to play. In fact, combat and characters are what make this game, but burnout is all too possible and real. Unless you're 100% enamored with the game, you might want to limit your play sessions to a chapter at a time, if that, as sooner or later it all starts to blend together, and you only feel different depending on which character you're playing, which will send you through that story mode all over again. This community has a lot of what you would expect, both the otaku and the anime haters alike, giving the chats a bit of hostility. Outside of a few conversations that spark some heated debates, the chat is rather silent. There's an oddity as well, in that you don't actually create the parties in this game to do group content. Instead, you climb onto the leader's mount and will be taken into the story mission with them. Or you can just jump into a public queue. At the end of each mission, whoever wants to be the leader simply needs to select the Join Together button to summon their mount, and everyone else will be prompted to climb onto it to continue. Once inside, the game will scale your enemies to meet the amount of people in your group, but it won't feel like a huge difference unless someone isn't pulling their weight. If a player leaves, the game will automatically adjust its difficulty to match as well. If another player goes down in battle, they'll lose some experience, which, while displaying an impressively large number, is only a negligible amount. Some of that experience can be recovered if another player comes over to rescue you, in one of the most absurd ways possible. You literally kneel down and beat the shit out of their unconscious body until they get back up. CPR doesn't work that way. This oddly carries over to the guild system, which, other than allowing you to see who's online and chatting, it doesn't seem to do much else. Well, there is one thing. That it gives you additional hearts to spread around to other players. Said hearts seem to give you a buff when you collect 3 of them in a day, but outside of that, we have no idea what they're actually for. Nothing explains the guild system or the heart system outside of the easily missed comic-style tooltips on the loading screen, which I think are a nice touch, though you rarely have the time to read them. All in all, a very short section, as there isn't much for the community to do, beyond the obvious dungeon running. And otherwise, they're just kinda there if you want to talk with them or not. This is going to be one of those sections that'll cause no end in grief for us, but we might as well just push it through. Besides having one of the best songs in the game, for some odd reason, the cash shop has your typical sights, with lucky boxes, cosmetics, and VIP boosts for subscribing. But the unfortunate part of the system is that it can easily be dubbed as pay to win. Though many might want to argue against it, as the game is inherently easy on its own and not all that challenging. But being a subscriber grants you with many boosts and buffs that will make you run faster, do more damage, take less damage, and recover more health than a non-paying player, which will give you an unquestionable advantage if you pay. The shocking part of the system is that it'll get even more brokenly pay to win the longer that you're paying. It's like tripling down on a troubling idea. The longer you subscribe, the higher in subscriber tier you'll claim, thus making all of those bonuses even more potent. It's not uncommon for subscription benefits to increase with time, but they usually don't end up making the game's combat easier as a result. If you want to dip into the cash shop, the current exchange rate is $5 for 500 ka-ching. Yeah, that fun little leftover name from Killer Combo is all the more unfortunately apropos now, isn't it? This carries over to the cosmetics as well, as they too will grant you buffs and benefits for paying some cash. But the overall prices don't seem worth it. Head slot, top, bottom, and shoes for $4, while everything else is $2.50, seems rather steep for cosmetics, even if they do come with buffs for your character. Summer events brought along a two-piece bikini equipable on any female character. Yes, any, because Korea. But oddly, the cash shop outfits seem far less unique and styled for the character you're playing. And buying up some cash shop items somehow makes your character look far more generic than they would if you left their default outfit on. Especially in the cases of Hades and Jerry, and Nagne, and Ara, and Marion. Okay, everyone looks more unique in their default outfit. Buffs are seriously the only reason to get these. If you really like parting with your cash, you can always go on those lucky boxes as well, with the cheapest running you about $3, or an aura for $15 if you want to stand out from the crowd more. Well, what I got out of this game is pretty much exactly what I was expecting to get out of it. Insane action with an even more insane story and characters. But what befell me is the exact same thing that befell me with the former Killer Combo's other titles of Elsword and Grand Chase. Repetitive gameplay sequences that, while flashy and entertaining, all began to blend together regardless of changes to the scenery. Does that make HeroWarz as terrible as its name? Certainly not, but when a game starts and ends with balls-to-the-wall action surrounded by pants-on-head absurdity, nothing surprises you anymore. Here's my final rating. The game's combat system is still its best feature, as per the usual with COG games. It's flashy and bombastic, without making everything you do feel over the top, allowing you to pull out the big guns, quite literally sometimes, when the situation calls for it. Also, having a free choice of so many characters with differing playstyles can bring in some fresh changes to the combat, or at least ensure you'll find a character that fits your playstyle all the better for the long haul. This is another game very well suited to quick burst gameplay. You can hop in, play a chapter or a mission or two, and hop out with no need to feel like you're lagging behind the curve. I'd almost suggest you have to play it this way, but it's a plus all the same. The most useful, to a fault, purchasable feature in the game is the VIP status. Once again, acting like a subscription, but granting you a ton of useful benefits, some of which a bit too useful, and stacking with the amount of time that you have them. Cosmetics are a good driving force here in general, especially with no character creation mechanic, so if you don't think Hades looks good as a curly-haired redhead, or your shirtless samurai might look better attending the apocalypse in business casual, you could always drop the money for that instead. The nature of the beat-em-up, HeroWar's greatest fault lies in something that kills a lot of games like this: lack of general gameplay variety. Especially considering your reward for trudging through the game's lengthy story campaign is repetitive random stage, enemy, and boss dumps that last 15 to 20 minutes apiece, and you might wonder why you bothered to get that far in the first place. Play it in short bursts or you'll risk growing tired of it very quickly. Of course, if those story missions are something you'd think might carry you through the game, unless you're a big fan of watching movies like Birdemic or The Room, the parade of absurdity, ridiculous references, or borrowed assets might have you groaning harder at the screen than your 5th and Kaido wipe. With a story constantly being pushed onto you every cutscene or mid-battle, your skip button might get a workout, or your sanity will. Next time is pretty up in the air about what we're doing, but there's plenty of side quest fodder coming with the whole summer season drawn to a close. Hey, once again, thanks for sticking around for after the credits. Clicking on the window on the left will take you to the last episode on Starbreak, which is a pretty unique game, and probably the only time I've actually did a full review on a game I'd done earlier in browser-based. It's worth a look, but it's one of those polarizing games that not everybody's on board with. If you click on the window on the right, it'll take you over to the last side quest I did on Twin Saga. Release date of that is seemingly coming up close, but we're not entirely sure how close, so I didn't want to make any calls just yet. I've made some decent minor changes to my Patreon, so if you're ever interested in that, go ahead and check it out, as now I'm going monthly, so I can at least focus more on side content and kinda justify this whole one episode a month thing. Also, the Raid Leader Patron perk has changed a little bit, so go ahead and check that out if you want. Once again, I'd like to very heavily and specifically thank Slipstream for his support by plugging his website over at notokensrequired.com, as well as his podcast location at twitch.tv/notokensrequired. He's got some changes to that show coming up too, so I should probably have some more information on that one next episode. Chaos, the MMO Grinder fuck muffins, right there, and it's in the script. That was a little bonus for everyone who got to read that one.